In this video, I will show you how to configure an OSPF ASBR and route redistribution on the NOKIA 7750SR. By default, OSPF will only advertise interfaces configured as OSPF interfaces. Network prefixes that are learned from other routing protocols such as RIP, BGP, ISIS, static and locally connected networks are not automatically advertised into the OSPF domain. To advertise other network prefixes into OSPF, we must export them into the OSPF routing domain through a process known as route redistribution. Route redistribution can only be done by the ASBR. In this lab, we will configure router 6 as an ASBR, create 3 loopback interfaces, configure a prefix list to include the loopback interfaces, a route policy to reference the prefix list. We then configure the OSPF process to use the route policy on export. Lastly, we will check and confirm the XML prefixes are learned within the other OSPF areas. So let's go to the CLI and begin. Our first task says we need to configure router 6 as an ASBR. Let's go to the CLI and start with the configuration. Before we start our configuration, it's a good idea to check what we currently have in the OSPF database of all the routers. So we issue the show router OSPF database. We should only have 3 types of LSAs, which are the router LSA, the network LSA, and the summary LSA. Let's go to router 2 and do the same thing. We're expecting this to change when we configure the ASBR. Let's go to router 1 and do the same thing. So we only have 3 types there as well: router, summary, and network. And then router 5. Same thing. So we currently don't have any external type LSAs on all the routers. No external type, only type 1, 2, and 3. So let's get on with the configuration of the ASBR on router 6. To do that, we issue the configure router OSPF, and if I issue a question mark here, you'll see all the options we have. But the option that we are interested in at the minute is the ASBR. So we issue the configure router OSPF ASBR. Enter. And that's pretty much all we need to do to configure a NOKIA 7750 as an ASBR. Configuring a router as an ASBR, however, doesn't enable it to start generating or sending out the type 4 or type 5 LSAs. As we can see here, if we issue the same command as we did before, show router OSPF database, we won't see any type 5 or type 4 LSAs as of yet. The reason for this is because we have not advertised those external routes into the OSPF, so we won't see any change. So to do that, that will be done when we configure the 3 loopbacks interfaces and then advertise them into OSPF. Then router 6 will start sending out the type 4 and type 5 summary LSAs for those networks. So let's get on with that. Our second task says we need to create 3 loopback interfaces. These interfaces will be representing the 3 external networks that we are planning to advertise into our OSPF domain. So let's go to the CLI of router 6 and do just that. If you remember from the NRS 1 series, to configure a loopback interface, you issue the configure router interface and the name of the interface. In our case, this will be loopback 01. The name could be anything you choose, by the way. I'm just choosing loopback 01 in this case. Enter. We need now to specify to CLI that this is a loopback interface by issuing the loopback keyword. Enter. Now we need to put the address in. Our address will be 192.168.6.1/32 for loopback 1. Enter. Now we can arrow up and do the same thing, which will make our configuration a lot faster. So if we do arrow up and get back to the initial command, we change loopback 1 to loopback 2, loopback address, we change this to .2, exit. We do the same thing for loopback 3, specify the loopback keyword, the address in this case will be .3, exit all, show router interface. Just to confirm those interfaces are up. As you can see, the 3 loopback interfaces are up. Right, so we've configured router 6 as an ASBR. We've created 3 loopback interfaces on router 6. Let's now check the OSPF database to see if anything has changed as of yet. So again, we issue the show router OSPF database, return nothing has changed in OSPF. Reason being, we have not advertised these 192.168 addresses into our OSPF domain. So OSPF is still unaware of those networks. And to prove that, let's go to router 2 and do the same command. So router 2 also does not know about those new networks. They are external to OSPF. So in our next task, we are going to create a prefix list, and these will be used to advertise those loopback into our OSPF domain. So let's go on to our task 3. Our third task says we need to configure the prefix list. Now the prefix list will include the 3 loopback interfaces IP addresses that will later be used within our route policy to advertise those addresses into our OSPF domain. So let's get on with the creation of the prefix list. If you remember from the NRS 1 series, to create the prefix list, you issue the configure router policy options, enter. Now we need to issue the begin keyword here, but sometimes, I've seen this happen many times by the way, a lot of people forget to issue the begin keyword and just carry on to create the prefix list. Now in our case, I want to name the prefix list as R6_loopbacks. So I'm going to issue R6_loopbacks. I just want to show you what could happen if you forget the begin keyword. So if I hit return here, it's going to say there's a minor error. We cannot edit the policy without the begin keyword. Basically, that's all that is saying to us here. So to correct that, we issue the begin and then carry on with our prefix list configuration. So begin and then prefix list R6_loopbacks. Hit return. Now we need to put in the IP addresses of those 3 loopback interfaces, but there's a shorter way to do that as well. You can put the subnet that will cover those addresses. So to do that, we issue the prefix 192.168.6.0/24 longer. Now, like I said, we're using the short form of this command. We can also issue the individual IP addresses like so, 192.168.6.1/32 exact. But then I need to repeat the same command for .1, .2, and .3. So to speed things up for us, I think it's better we use the .0/24 longer. Hit return, exit. And we don't forget to commit. After you've done any changes to the policy, you need to commit. So we issue the commit keyword here, and that has concluded the creation of the prefix list. The fourth task says we need to configure the route policy. So let's get on with that. Our fourth task says we need to configure the route policy. The route policy will be used within our OSPF process to redistribute those 3 loopback interfaces into our OSPF domain. So let's get on with it. Again, we need to create the route policy within the policy options. So configure router policy options. I need to issue the begin keyword here again because I issued the commit previously. So I need to go in again and issue the begin keyword. And it's going to be policy statement. We're going to call this R6 underscore loopbacks dash into dash or underscore OSPF. You can call yours anything you want. It's just it depends on your naming convention. We just need something that is logical, basically. So we issue that command there. Now with the NOKIA 7750s, the entries are in increments of 10, and we need to create entries to populate this route policy. So our first entry here will be entry 10. Return. Let's give this a description, and we're going to call this to advertise loopback into OSPF. Return. Now we need to tell the policy statement to reference the previously created prefix list. So we're going to say from, and if I issue the question mark here, you'll see there are loads of options you can reference here, but in our case we want the prefix list. So we're going to say from prefix list, and if I tab here, it should show us the available prefix list. In our case we've only got one, but in yours you could have as many as you've created previously. You just need to pick the correct one. So in our case we want the R6 loopback. It return. Also we need to tell the statement, the policy router policy, that it is protocol direct. So again we'll say it's from protocol and it's direct. Now this means that directly connected interfaces or protocols, the loopback interfaces are regarded as directly connected. That's why we are specifying this here. So we hit return, and we now need to also tell the policy statement to accept the prefixes. So action is accept. You could have deny, I believe, or reject. You can have all these other options. You can add next up. You can do many things as your design requires. In our case, we just want to accept it for now. Exit. If I do an info here, we'll see what we've just configured. So we have entry 10 to advertise loopback into OSPF from protocol direct, from prefix list, and the default action is accept. So we exit that, and we, as always, commit, exit all, admin save. Now that has completed our task 4. We now need to configure OSPF to reference this new policy. That way OSPF will now start advertising those loopbacks into our OSPF domain. So let's get on with that. Our 5th task says we need to configure OSPF to reference the newly created route policy on export. So let's go to router 6 CLI and proceed. So to do that, we issue the configure router OSPF and its export. Yes, we issue the export keyword and specify the policy that we just created. If I do a tab, it should show us the only policy available because it's the only one we have. In your network, you should have as many as you've previously configured. In our case, it's just 1 for now. So we specify that on export, it return exit all. Again, admin save so as not to lose anything. Now, that has concluded the OSPF configuration to reference the policy on export. The last task now says we need to check and confirm those prefixes are now available within our OSPF areas. So let's go on to the CLI and do our verification checks. So on router 6, let's issue again the show router OSPF database to see what has changed, if anything has changed. And as you can see, and as expected, we now have 3 external LSAs in our database. So those are for the loopback interfaces that we created earlier. We are advertising this into our OSPF process or our OSPF domain from router 6. Router 6 is the ASBR. As you can see, the advertising router ID is of the router 6. So let's go on to the other routers within the domain and see if they now have those 3 newly created external networks. So again, show router OSPF database. And as you can see, router 2 also have those. Let's go to router 3 again. As you'll expect also. So this will be available on all the routers within our domain. As you can see, router 1 also now has the 3 loopback interfaces. So this has concluded our verification checks, and it had also the ASBR and route distribution task. So we started off by creating by specifying or configuring the router 6 as an ASBR. We created 3 loopback interfaces representing 3 separate networks, external networks. We configured a prefix list to include those loopback interfaces. We then created route policy to reference the prefix list. And lastly, we configured OSPF to use the route policy to advertise those 3 external networks into our OSPF domain. We then checked within our routers, within our domain, we could see we now have external LSA type 4 and type 5. So this has concluded this section. I hope you find this useful, and thank you for watching.